All right, friends. Well, it is lovely to join you tonight for this conversation. I've been looking forward to this particular conversation for a while now, so eager to be here with you. A brief word about etiquette, Zoom etiquette, we've all now become very familiar with this year. What I did was I went ahead and made sure that everyone who's not one of our panelists, just to hide your video for now and to make sure that you're muted. The way that we'll do this conversation tonight is we'll give a chance for our panelists to kind of start the conversation and really kick things off. And then at some point, I will cue you all who are here joining us for the conversation. And at that point, please feel free to turn on your video if you'd like to, and certainly your audio, so that you can engage a conversation as well. We want to hear your questions and your comments and your insights and stories. And so I'll make sure to let you know when it's time to do that. But we are so honored that you've chosen to share your evening with us. My name is Mallory Wyckoff. I serve as the director of Faith and Culture Center. And since it's probably most of you are familiar with FCC, but a note, I just got a note my internet is unstable, and so I'm hoping that it will keep going, but occasionally it slows down, so we'll see how, but if it slows me, I'll just come around. But I am of Faith and Culture Center, and we got our start really back in 2008 when there was a mosque in Columbia, Tennessee, just south of Nashville, was firebombed by several white supremacists. And DAOUD ABUDIAB, one of our panelists here tonight, served at that mosque and was certainly involved in the efforts to figure out what next steps were going to look like. And really, out of the ashes of that experience, Faith and Culture Center was birthed. And so we exist to build more inclusive communities. We're seeking to bridge divides across religion, race, ethnicity, and culture, really seeking to bring together diverse groups of people, and particularly Muslims and non-Muslims, around shared tables for meals and conversations. We really want people to get to know their neighbors, and particularly their Muslim neighbors. And so you'll see that clearly in our forum series, as it's called Table Talks, getting to know our Muslim neighbors and ourselves. So in a season where we are unable to gather in the flesh and blood around tables and kitchens and living rooms, we're wanting to bring our table to you. And that's really why we decided to put together this forum series, is so that we could bring our table to you and still engage in these really important conversations. I want to mention briefly what we call the 5 pillars of building inclusive community through FCC. So I'm going to mention these in the order that we kind of see them happen. And first is humility, understanding, respect, empathy, and compassion. We are thinking about these 5 pillars in everything that we're doing when we're building programs, when we're facilitating conversations. And so you'll hear us talk about those formally and informally, but they'll come up in our conversation tonight. And I think you'll see that those 5 values, those 5 pillars of building inclusive communities will be recurring themes in the things that we talk about and discuss. So just make a note of that, hold that in mind where you see those particular values surface in our conversation. As I said, the structure for tonight will be that our panelists will start the conversation. I'll offer some questions and kind of moderate that. And then eventually I'll kick it back to you, the viewers, so that you can offer your questions and your insight. And at that point, I'll invite you to turn on your videos and audio so that you can join us in that way. So without further ado, I'm thrilled to get to introduce you to our panelists. I really, really am so grateful for these human beings who have joined us tonight. So let me briefly introduce you to them, and certainly they can share more about themselves with you. But Khadija Ali is here. She is a second-year Master's of Theological Studies student at Harvard Divinity School. She's also a summer research associate with their Pluralism project at Harvard, which she'll share with us about tonight. She's a Belmont grad, studied German and philosophy, was a Fulbright scholar teaching English in Germany. So she's done some things. She's incredibly smart. She's incredibly kind. And she's really passionate about interfaith work, which she did a lot during her undergrad years and is certainly working on now with the Pluralism Project at Harvard. So Khadija, we are thrilled to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Also, we have Catherine Orsborn with us. She is Executive Director of Shoulder to Shoulder. For those of you who came to our Faith Over Fear conference back in February, the end of February, before the world shut down, we partnered with Shoulder to Shoulder campaign to put on that that conference. You might recognize her there, but it's a coalition-based campaign of religious denominations and faith-based groups that are committed to ending in violence against Muslims in the United States. She's been involved, did her PhD at the University of Denver, studying religion and peace building and deeply divided societies. And she just recently moved to Nashville, Tennessee, just before a tornado and pandemic. And so we are thrilled that she's here in Nashville. And I hope that her second year in Nashville will be slightly more normal than what this one has been. So glad you're with us, Catherine. Also want to introduce our third panelist. I mentioned him earlier, but he is a co-founder of Faith and Culture Center. He is a president of our board. He's also a veteran healthcare executive. He oversees and manages a large physician group, has been doing that type of work for over 20 years. He's received numerous awards for his community work. And if you have been involved in community-based efforts in Middle Tennessee, you are likely to encounter him in all sorts of ways, and to also be aware of his impact in the community. And so we're honored to have you here tonight, DAOUD. Thanks for being with us. And as I said, I'm Mallory Wyckoff. I serve as Executive Director of Faith and Culture Center, and I'm honored to get to moderate this conversation. So thanks for all who are here to join us. Without further ado, let's dive in. So I'm just going to offer a couple questions and invite each of our panelists just to engage those, and we'll move on from there. In the title for tonight's table talk, the forum, it's about really engaging religious pluralism, what it looks like to live your own truth while you're seeking to respect that of others. And so I'm curious for y'all, even when you think about that term religious pluralism, what does that mean for you? How do you define that? How do you sort of make sense of and conceptualize that idea of pluralism? So we can kind of lay that groundwork as we start our conversation. Khadija, you're at the Pluralism Project, so maybe you're our resident expert here.
I don't know if I would go so far as to call myself an expert, especially when two of my bosses are present. But I will say, I was going back through sort of what we have up on the Pluralism Project's website, which if you don't know about the Pluralism Project, it was founded in 1991 by Diane Eck, professor at Harvard. And it was inspired after she taught this class to her students called World Religions in New England. So they were exploring sort of all these different faith communities in the Boston area and the New England area. And then sort of after that experience, they broadened their research and investigation of the religious landscape of the United States as a whole. And so that's what the Pluralism Project really focuses on. And you can check out our website. It's got a lot of really great stuff on it. But I think one of the most interesting and most compelling sort of definitions that I've come across on our website is this, and I wrote it down, made note of it so I can read from it. But diversity, so it's written on the website, diversity alone does not constitute pluralism. It requires a degree of engagement with our diversity and knowledge, both of ourselves and others, and the knowledge that such engagement brings. And so I think that when you talk about pluralism, you're sort of stepping beyond just, you know, oh, we have a lot of Christians and Jews in this area, and it's great, like, look how pluralistic and diverse we are. But if there isn't an active effort by the individual and by the community to really engage the faith communities and the faith groups around them and engage critically in those conversations and have courageous and brave conversations about their differences and like what they know and what they don't know about each other. Without that, I don't really know if pluralism can truly exist. And there has to be like this active engagement. And so you step beyond just diversity and sort of the multiplicity of religions and faith groups. And so I think that's what pluralism means, roughly speaking.
Yeah, that's a great definition. Dawoud and Catherine, how do you all hear that? What would you add or nuance there?
I can jump in. Yeah, I really appreciate that definition. I remember when I first heard that one from the Pluralism Project specifically, it really resonated with me because I grew up having a pretty negative connotation of the word pluralism. Because I grew up in a more conservative evangelical environment, there was a lot of a sense that the word pluralism meant believing that every religion is equal and is different paths to the same end. And I remember, people around me having like a lot of negativity towards just the term pluralism in general. And I don't think that people were agreed upon what it even meant, but there was this kind of sense of negativity. And so when I started on my path of engaging difference, religious difference, more intentionally and sometimes unintentionally, I really have appreciated understanding pluralism, not so much as like thinking of everyone being roughly doing the same thing, going the same direction, but doing it in different, with slightly different language or something like that. But really actually seeing it as a positive engagement of diversity and actual attention to the difference. And curiosity about the difference rather than kind of washing everything over with the same brush. And one of the things that came to mind for me when thinking about pluralism also is how important it is to think about pluralism, not just between different religious traditions, but within, that what it means to be Christian or what it means to be Muslim or Jewish or non-religious means so many different things for different people and shows up in so many different ways. And so really making sure when we're talking about pluralism that we're acknowledging that diversity within, not just diversity between religious traditions understood in that sense.
Yeah, great. Dawoud, what are you hearing in that?
Yeah, I like what both have said, and hello everyone, good to be with you tonight and share this time. I've always been blessed to have lived in a very diverse community, faith-wise, Muslim, Christian, Jewish mainly. And it wasn't until the early 2000s, for good reasons, obviously, that we started hearing tolerance existing together and in the same space and sharing that space and tolerating one another. For me, it goes well beyond that. I think that's such a low standard. For me, it's always been about being able to coexist, but also to be fully who you are. For us to give permission to one another, to be fully who we are. And my experience has led me to believe that often it's very difficult to do that when we know very little about one another. And so growing up in the city of Jerusalem, we had Jewish and Christian neighbors. And I found out early on that a lot of what I knew or I thought I knew about other faith traditions was really not from those practicing those traditions. It was maybe what I've heard from Muslim sources about them. And so as I came to the United States and following the firebombing of the Islamic Center and kind of my initiation in interfaith circles, I found out that I actually knew very little. A little bit of truth mixed with a lot of misrepresentation. And I realized how difficult it is to really be tolerant of someone and if you don't have any knowledge of who they are. and how to give them space, how to be respectful, how to engage the others, and how to really not get in the way of allowing others to fully reach their potential. Faith and other, I mean, we can't separate faith from any other aspect of our lives.
So some of the themes that I'm sort of hearing each of you name is one that it seems like tolerance and diversity are essential sort of baseline values perhaps, but only the first start. Maybe tolerance in that, okay, we're able to coexist and to get along in a reasonable way and frankly not kill each other, right? Like that would be a reasonable starting point, an essential one. And that the value of diversity, like having a diverse group of people that can be together, that these are important values, but they are merely starting points and stepping stones. And I heard each of you name that really ultimately that the ends that we're moving towards is real engagement with other humans who are different from you. And one of the things I heard you mention specifically, Catherine, is in that the need to not collapse those differences and sort of, as you said, sort of broad brush all of these and shrink everything down to the lowest common denominator among all of these different traditions and faiths and what they look like in order to just get along, right? But that actually, if we're going to move beyond just that mere tolerance and work towards deeper engagement and relationship, it will require an acknowledgement of those differences, and then the learning how to navigate those differences, which is really what we're wanting to talk about tonight. So maybe you all can kind of share, how do you come to this conversation then in your own particular sensibilities, your own particular social locations, your own particular sort of faith narratives? What brings you into this conversation and why it's a conversation that you think is worth having and that one you want to engage?
Okay, I usually like to go last, so I'll jump in and give Khadija a little more time to think about her response. You know, I've always had a passion for meeting people and getting to know new people and make friends and be inquisitive. And coming from a different part of the world into the United States, it seems like my story would be of interest to other people because I'm not the average person on the street. However, you know, every person I meet, their story is of great interest to me because it's equally different than mine. And listening, you know, I think I've learned, and I struggle sometimes to do that, but to approach those opportunities in getting to know whether it's neighbors or people at work or peers or just somebody at the park with an openness and listening for others to tell their story. Wait for that and be patient with it. It allows for us to really, I think that if anything, as a definition of what tolerance means, it's really allowing the other person to tell their story. And that's the best way to learn about one another. And so I find out that I learn a great deal simply allowing for that silence sometimes in that exchange, and more information comes out, but to do it with intention. So it's an intentional effort, not simply to chat or pass time. Often, you know, we'd like to think that that we don't have agendas. Well, I think of agenda as in being intentional about truly getting to know the other person beyond most conversations. And so in my, for example, work environment, I've been around this particular team for almost 20 years. But I would say it is on rare occasions that we dig deep enough, other than the people who hang out in groups together, in conversations that allow us to get to know one another with any kind of depth, to get to know what the other person holds dear in terms of their values. Their faith tradition, of course, is important to all of us. And for those who don't necessarily practice a specific tradition or subscribe to one, no faith at all, have their own tradition. And learning to follow up so that the information that is being shared becomes part of what you build on in terms of a meaningful relationship and hopefully a friendship. And so at work, I would say very few of my relationships go to that depth. We become functional in how we engage other people, and being intentional about simply spending time listening, exchanging ideas, learning, reflecting. That's where I think the magic happens in getting to know one another.
Thanks, Daoud. Catherine or Khadija, something you would add there?
I can jump in. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I had grown up with such a negative sort of. I had to unlearn the ways in which pluralism was presented to me growing up, and I think that I saw it between two poles, like one of this very exclusivist approach that only my faith understands what's happening in the world, and this very I would say arrogant approach to faith and to the way that we sort of live into the world. And then on the opposite end of that, this kind of sense of everything being the same, and that we don't need to talk about difference because we're all one, we're all united, and that's all we need to know. And I think that the more complicated and more difficult but most important work is in the in-betweens there. And I think different people find themselves maybe in different spaces in that in-between, but this sense that you can honor and get curious about difference, about your own and about others. And I really appreciate what DAOUD is saying about that kind of approach of curiosity towards others and towards yourself. I think that it works both ways. But really being able to live into a little bit of that discomfort in some ways. And for me, it's been a growth over the years in being comfortable or allowing discomfort to be there sometimes, and allowing for connection without sameness, and recognizing that's a value that I want to be living into. And then the other thing I would say, through my work with Shoulder to Shoulder, which, as Mallory said at the beginning, is about people of a variety of different faith backgrounds standing alongside American Muslims against discrimination and violence, targeting American Muslims specifically. And when I have conversations with some folks who are a little bit skeptical of that work, I think their assumption coming into it is that that Shoulder to Shoulder as an organization, or I as a person, think that they need to come to connect with and sort of accept as truth every teaching of Islam, which of course, like what we're even talking about with that is complex, because there's many, many different ways of understanding Islam. But I think that there's this tendency to believe that in order to stand alongside people or believe in the humanity and the rights of people, that you somehow have to accept every belief as truth. And I personally have found so much, I still identify as Christian, and I have personally have found so much richness and learning through understanding Islam and through connecting with Muslims. And I have learned so much, and it has really changed my faith and how I see and relate to God in so many different ways, because I've learned so much. And at the same time, I don't think that the bar for somebody standing up for the rights of their Muslim neighbors to freely worship and to live in safety, that's not contingent upon connecting with somebody's beliefs necessarily. I hope that happens. I hope that they get to experience that, because it's so beautiful and powerful. But at the same time, like this, I think it's a falsehood that you have to have sameness in order to find that respect and curiosity towards the other. So I hope that made sense.
Yeah, really nicely said. Thank you. Khadija?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think for me, I sort of accidentally became a magnet for people's curiosity. And I say that because I started wearing the hijab really young. And I think I tie my own sort of, my curiosity and my own kind of spiritual journey. That word is like overused, but I guess that's the only thing I can call it. I tie it to when I started wearing the hijab, and I chose to wear it when I was 8 years old. In 2005 in Canada. And I was only 8, and so I wasn't very aware of like this thing called 9/11 that had just happened a couple of years before. And it really wasn't until my family moved from Ottawa to the United States that I started to really feel my religion on me. Because we were the only Muslims in town, in this tiny little town in Northeast Georgia. And for me, navigating the questions that I always got and the sort of kind of script that you come up with after a while, after being asked, why do you wear that thing on your head? What is Muslim? What's Islam? Where is Islam? And you get bombarded with all of these questions, and you sort of just learn how to answer them, but they're very rudimentary answers. And for me, it wasn't until I started, I think, high school and in college where I really started digging deep into my own faith and learning about the diversity within my own religious tradition. And it's ultimately what took me to grad school. I was more interested in learning more about Islam, its intellectual history, its theological history, and all of that. And for me, that kind of openness, I guess, that I have as a person, that drew people to me, and people would always feel really comfortable sharing their own experiences and what they've lived through. I've sort of harnessed that throughout my life, and it's fed my own curiosity about people. And I like to ask questions. I've always liked to ask questions. And I'm always drawn to people who sort of seem like they're not like everyone else in the room. And that's the person who is most interesting to me. And so I go and I try to maybe ask and figure them out. And I think one memory I have, because this encounter sort of blossomed into like one of the best friendships I have, was when I was living in Germany last year. I was at an international students orientation and at the university in Germany, and there was this Black guy sitting behind me. He looked mixed. And he spoke in like this very proper way, but it was like an American accent, but it was like, what kind of American accent is this? I'm not sure. So I introduced myself when we were chatting, and he was like, oh, my name is Brandon, blah, blah, blah. And he's telling me about, you know, I'm from DC, I'm originally from Florida. And he's like, I speak Arabic. And I'm like, oh, very random. He was like, yeah, I'm also Jewish. Oh, okay. I'm also Jewish with both Ashkenazi and Sephardic background. Oh, and my dad's Jamaican, my mom's Belizean, and our heritage is from Scotland. And so I was like, well, you're an interesting person, let's be friends. And it's really through the sort of conversations that I had with him and the way he sort of navigated his Jewishness and his encounters with Muslims, and he has like lots of Muslim friends in DC. We've had like really rich conversations, and it sort of gave me this into like a whole other sort of world of Judaism that I didn't know existed, because Judaism and Jewish people had always been presented to me as like mostly just Ashkenazi or like European Jews. And so for me, that's really sort of what, I guess, what drives my curiosity, and where I sort of find like meaning in those kinds of encounters and those conversations and engagements, is through those one-on-one sort of interpersonal relationships with people and friendships, and how just like one person can open a whole other world of like a religious tradition that you didn't even know existed, or a community that you didn't even know existed. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings me to my next question, which is really to kind of even give everyone a sense of how this particular topic came to be. So several weeks ago, DAOUD and I were talking about several different things, and he mentioned some experiences he was having, and ultimately we ended up talking about his swimming pool. And he has a lovely swimming pool in his backyard, and he and Robin are such gracious hosts to everyone that they meet. And I said, you know, DAOUD, if you all were to invite me to your house to swim, like my family and me, if you were to invite us to come swim, I'm not sure that I would know what to wear. And that ultimately, from that conversation and different things we were discussing around it, is what surfaced. Then we said this would be a great discussion topic, not what we should wear at the swimming pool necessarily, but the reality that those very flesh and blood particulars, right? Not to put too fine a point on it, but those particulars are where this really, the rubber meets the road and things get fleshed out. Because I'm thinking, even in that scenario, what does it look like for me to live my own values, my own convictions, and my own sensibilities in a way that is honoring to me and to what is true, and at the same time to respect and honor the sensibilities or traditions, convictions of my friends DAOUD and Robin. And so maybe we'll come back and talk about even those particulars in a minute if you want to, but I want to invite you all now, where are some of the particular places that being in real relationship with other human beings across lines of difference, where have those taken place? Like, what are those particular pieces where you realize, okay, there's a tension here between my truth and that of another person? And how have you evaluated that? How have you managed to navigate those tensions? DAOUD, I know you're sitting on something good to say, so go for it.
I don't know how you can tell, but I hate to, I don't want to disappoint you, so here it comes. You know, Khadija mentioned, and I think Catherine, curiosity and listening to one another. I don't think that it always goes well. You know, just like diversity isn't necessarily by default a positive thing. I think it's how we manage it determines the outcome. And so there are times when we have opportunity to share, that the information being shared and the way it is received isn't really conducive to getting to know one another. And, there has to be a reset. I think we all come to the table or to those conversations with a not necessarily biases, but some knowledge. And often we put different values on what we know, and we don't necessarily want to be wrong. And so as we engage the whole time that we are sharing, we're both possibly thinking about, how do I want to respond to what you just shared with me? And particularly if it's different than what I already know. And so I know Khadija would agree with me that she's been in conversations where somebody maybe asked a question or initiated a conversation only to really tell her so much about who she is, and not necessarily waiting on her to share about, for example, what does the hijab mean for her? And so somebody would say, well, this is what I know about hijab. It is oppressive. You're probably forced to do it. And I see Khadija nodding. I think those are things we have to acknowledge. What I've learned is that a reset is very important when we are exchanging information. I have my biases because of my faith tradition regarding what a Christian individual may share with me, because my initial reaction is going to be to kind of process that information in light of what I already know. And for Muslims in particular, often there's so much misinformation out there that what we share is really very different than what most people already know. And so it becomes really difficult because either we don't know what we're talking about, or we're lying, or we're somehow communicating to that person that what they know is incorrect. And so there's tension there when the conversation does move from a meet and greet to, okay, I am interested, let's learn about one another. And that's why those conversations are very difficult to have. I mentioned 20 years working at the same place, and I would say that comfort doesn't exist with some individuals, and in general, it probably does not. And so those conversations won't take place. And there's a little bit of bidding that goes on with people that we share space with. Let's say in a classroom, there are comments, there are situations where we get feedback from other individuals, whether we are welcome to really share openly or simply hide behind the label that is perceived and shut down. And I don't know if Khadija would agree with that, and maybe her own personal experience with it.
Yeah, I think when it comes to sort of navigating those conversations, and so being a Muslim woman, and there's various degrees of how many people, like how many women accept this or not. So a lot of Muslim women don't shake hands. And they just, like men who are not their immediate family members, they don't shake hands with, they don't hug, they don't any of that. And for me, explaining to people that reality, though for me it's not a big issue and I don't really abide by it because I'm comfortable shaking hands with men. For a lot of people, it's sometimes they just kind of like, they're really uncomfortable and they're caught off guard and they just shake hands and they're like, oh my God, that really bothered me. And I'll ask them, well, like, why didn't you explain that, oh, I don't shake hands with men. It's part of my religion. And so funny, I'm thinking we're talking about handshaking and we're living in a pandemic and I couldn't imagine shaking hands with anyone right now and feeling comfortable. But there's this, so there's this guard up that some women have, and they don't really know, some Muslim women have, and they don't really know how to navigate those conversations. And I think a part of it is like fear of being othered in those spaces, and fear of being sort of, well, if I act in this way and this is this person's representation of Islam and they're going to think I'm this backwards person who's living in the West and doesn't shake hands and blah, blah, blah. And so I decide to do something that is not what I believe or like would usually conduct myself, and I do so. And I think like those questions too, like recently I was looking at Instagram and like the questions that Muslim women get or hijabi women get about headscarf, and like there's just taboo questions that like you shouldn't ask women who wear headscarves. So like, what does your hair look like, or like how long is your hair, or like the bizarre ones like, do you wear that in the shower, like just strange bizarre questions that we're constantly dealing with. And really the only way that I've sort of learned how to handle them is to just be generous with people and be honest with them in that sort of generosity, and be myself and say, hey, don't ask me that question because I don't feel comfortable responding because of XYZ reasons. And so when I think when you inhabit like and when you sort of have built a kind of confidence in your own identity and in your own personhood, it gets easier to just say, this is me. I respect you. I respect where you're coming from. If there was something that I said that would offend you, please let me know. And if there's a way that you would prefer I conduct myself, like in your house of worship or in your home, do let me know. And I, in turn, expect that be reciprocated. And so like a lot of friends, when they ask me, oh, I want to like go visit the mosque, like what should I like wear something, blah, blah, blah. I'll say, yeah, I mean, like it's a house of worship. Like usually women, even Muslim women who don't wear the headscarf, when they go, they try to dress more modestly and cover. And so that would be something that you can maybe observe for your visit. And I think like once you sort of inhabit this confidence and know that it's rooted in one, respect for an honesty with your own self, and respect for an honesty towards others who are unlike you, it becomes easier and more sort of intuitive to navigate those conversations and navigate those spaces. And like it's you know, we're living through a pandemic, and so I always like come across these things on the internet about sort of like social etiquettes during a pandemic when you like want to be socializing in a socially distant way. It's totally okay if someone calls you and asks beforehand, hey, who have you been in contact with like over the week? And what sort of events have you been going to sort of gauge how comfortable they are attending, right? And I think there's a similar parallel that sort of abides within these kind of these like sort of interpersonal cross-religious relationships and conversations.
Yeah, so well said. Catherine, what did you want to say there?
Oh yeah, sorry. I mean, what DAOUD and Khadija have shared has been so helpful. And when you asked that question, Mallory, one of the, there were two different things that came to mind for me. One was, especially when I first started with Shoulder to Shoulder, which was about 6 years ago, just how unsure I was about what to wear in different spaces. Like I knew what to wear when going to a mosque. And that was most of I had plenty of Muslim friends at grad school, and I didn't think about it in those kind of contexts. And then I had been to mosques a number of times in the US and abroad, and had a fairly confident sense of like how to dress in those spaces. But it was kind of the middle spaces that I was a little unsure, like my first times going to a Muslim hosted event or conference or dinner or those sorts of things, that I was not sure, you know, should I dress the way I would dress going into a mosque? Or should I dress how I would dress around my Muslim friends from grad school, or those sorts of questions. So that was one that came to mind for me, Mallory, and especially one, I remember one experience kind of early on in that of going to, I think it was a conference or something like that that was hosted by a Muslim organization, and I was going to it with a Muslim friend, but a Muslim friend who had a little tension with the organization that was hosting it, and felt frustrated if she didn't cover, and she felt frustrated with a sense of being expected to do that as a Muslim woman. And so I was dressed more modestly than she was. And then I got confused about like, should I be like, how do I act? How do I be in this situation? And I think as Khadija pointed out, like over time, I have gotten more comfortable, not that I always get it right, and I don't even know if there is a right in these sorts of situations, but where I feel more comfortable and confident in what I'm doing. But one of the other like experiences that came to mind for me when you were talking too was actually my baby shower 3 years ago now, for my first baby. And I had invited a group of friends, some of them Muslim and Jewish. And I was trying to figure out, we were planning to have, like, it was a brunch. We were planning to have mimosas and that sort of thing. And I think one of my friends was making like bacon wrapped dates. And as they were sharing with me what they were planning to make for the party, I then like had this like, oh gosh, like what if they're making everything with pork in it? Or what if there are no drinks besides water that don't have alcohol in them or something? And just like figuring out both, like, one, making sure that there were plenty of options for people who were invited, and making sure I was making a space that was comfortable for anyone who I invited to that, but also making sure I communicated with them as well beforehand. Like I didn't know for sure if any of my Muslim friends would feel uncomfortable coming to a party that had alcohol served, even if there were plenty of other options available and that sort of thing. So I remember that being a situation where I was like, oh, right, this stuff comes to a real tangible sort of like, how do we honor honor different approaches to some of these various very like tangible things in these types of situations. And it feels to me like values that emerge for me in that were like around hospitality, like who's hosting, and really thinking about the host and being generous to who's hosting, and as the host at times being generous in thinking about who's coming and what will help make them comfortable without not doing it the way that I want to do it in throwing a party or something like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's always a little bit complicated, but yeah, having that curiosity and just giving some intention to it, and having the relationships to be able to have the conversations if you need to, feels really important.
I have to agree with Catherine. I think I don't want to let the pool issue go by without responding to it. So the easiest thing would be to not invite Mallory to the pool, right? And that's truly what happens most of the time, is that because, as Catherine said, you truly have to navigate our differences. And it's important to note that the strange aspect to what we learn about one another is bidirectional. And so if you're part of a majority and I'm Muslim, most of my differences from a majority would be this, what is termed as deemed strange. I have to realize that everything that you share with me, while your impression is that this is the norm, it's actually strange to me. And I think this is a good place to start from, is realize our differences and realize that there may be uncomfortable moments, and there may be different ways that we can go about doing things. Catherine mentioned trust, as you learn, and respect. I think Khadija mentioned respect. If those are the basis, and I know that you have respect for me as a person and of my tradition and my beliefs, then it is highly unlikely that I'm going to interpret what you say or do as being offensive. And so at some point in the relationship, we are going to grant one another permission to ask questions and get things wrongly. That's going to be tolerated. And then we can navigate. There's certainly times it's equally difficult to invite a Muslim family. My wife also wears a hijab. And so if I have a Muslim family, my wife is not going to put on her bathing suit and swim. There are times when I may, refrain from swimming, but we can still share that space. And there are going to be those uncomfortable moments. I think if we realize that my values and what I practice is meaningful to me only because of what I believe to be my truth, I can be accepting that your truth can be different. And so as I expect you to respect my truth for me as being valid, while possibly not valid for you, I think I owe you the same. And, as a Muslim, what I've learned is that I owe you at least equal to what you offer me in kindness and in generosity and in understanding. And so that has made it much easier for me to engage non-Muslim friends at different levels. And something that a friend shared with me that I think is rooted in a lot of our diverse traditions is that I think it is also true in the eyes of God that the person is always more important than the principle. I can always use opportunities where things are imperfect, to explain, to share. And when we engage at that level, there's a great deal of opportunity to really correct, to modify, to navigate, to change, and focus less on maybe what may have happened or what may have been said. I've had bacon wrap dates. It was lamb bacon. And so if I were to visit Kathy and she said, I'm going to have, I have a great recipe for lamb wrap, for bacon wrapped dates, and we've already had this conversation, I think my expectation would be that if she did have it, that would be okay. I don't necessarily have to eat that. And it doesn't diminish who I am if I didn't eat it. And part of my tradition also tells me that not to be offensive as a host or as a guest. And so if I am a guest, I have a way to navigate around that. And as we learn about one another, it is easy. It truly is easy to find those solutions. As Khadija said, look how much we are negotiating, how many things we're negotiating with COVID to be safe in those spaces. And so I would know that at some point in the relationship, Catherine may say, I so love the lamb bacon so much more that, I truly enjoy making this, but I have to tell you, DAOUD, I made it with pork bacon last week and it was equally delicious for me. And I would be fine with that. There are ways where we can allow each other to be who they are and not be offended by that. Ultimately, we all want to be who we are. And I think it's a two-way street with respect. Given that we have differences, we don't negotiate who we are. We negotiate those trivial things. And as we grow together, we have less of those things that truly may be more offensive, maybe at the first meeting. As we grow, my experience has been that there are fewer things that offend me. And maybe part of that is because I'm more focused on the person, the human being, and what the relationship means and what we both gain, not just in having a friendship. That's not the only goal I have, but it is to grow in my faith. And for me to fully practice my faith, I don't think I can do that in a community that only has Muslims only. The greatest opportunity for me to live out my faith is to be in a group like we have tonight, not to be at the Islamic Center in Williamson County.
This conversation isn't even over and I'm already so grateful for it. I want to name a few, you all have started to name some of your values, your sort of orienting values that help you navigate and discern these very particular decisions. And while some of the things that we're naming, right, like what we eat, what we wear, these are not the most important parts of our faith, and yet at times they are the most visible and the things that can become kind of this a point of tension or a place to stumble over in between our relationships. And so they are important to talk about, because ultimately, as each of you has said, the relationship behind those things is what matters most. And so I want to offer a few of my sort of points of discernment that I'm trying to always think through as I navigate this. And then I want to invite you all, if there's any that you might add there, and then we're going to open it up for everyone else to join in with their questions and their insights and comments and so forth. But thinking about some of my points of discernment that I utilize really for both intra-faith engagement and also interfaith engagement, because as Catherine named earlier, there's so much difference even within one given faith tradition. Sometimes for me, even more difference there than when I'm doing interfaith engagement. So some of my points of discernment and values that I'm trying to think through are one, I'll even do a spiritual practice of just grounding, literally just seeing my feet on the ground, acknowledging that I am here fully present and that I don't have to, in this space, seek to become more than I am, nor will I seek to become less than I am. And that practice is important for me to think about, okay, what space is mine to take up here in this moment? And might a particular action or inaction, might that be seeking to take up more space than I ought to, or might that me be diminishing myself and becoming smaller and taking up less space? And to me, both of those are equally unhelpful. And so trying to find what it means to be who I am fully in this moment, that's an important practice for me. If I notice any sense of shame, if there's something where I start to feel like how my sense of how someone might interpret my action, if that leaves me with a sense of shame, then that's something that I really take a long time to process, particularly because of my formative experiences in fairly fundamentalist circles where there was a whole lot of shaming. And I found that to be so detrimental for myself and for those around me. And so when I notice that some of those old maybe patterns or habits resurface, that's something for me to pay attention to. And then to work beyond, am I feeling this way just because maybe that shame trigger has occurred? Or is there something beyond that? And is there something beyond that to pay attention to as I'm seeking to be hospitable to those around me? And then another one as well is, you mentioned hospitality. All of you have mentioned that value, which is essential, and one that I think all of our faiths share and value and highlight. But thinking about, in a given space, do I come in some majority, or do I come in a minority in some way? And again, this is both for intra-faith and interfaith engagement. And that gives me a sense of maybe what my obligation is in that moment. Is it in that moment to not partake in something because I already come in with a bigger sense of being in the majority and having access to power and voice? And so maybe actually the most hospitable thing for me to do is to not partake. Let's say to drink alcohol, maybe to not partake there, because that would be the way to utilize that sense of power or voice that I come into the room already, bearing by virtue of some of my identities. That's a way to utilize that power, that voice in a hospitable way. Or maybe in another space where actually a hospitable thing for me and for myself is to be fully who I am in a space and to drink the alcohol that I'm going to drink, because that is a norm for me and a practice for me. And that's part of living fully who I am in that space. And so as you named, each of you has named, there is not necessarily a right for this, but these are some of the ways that I'm trying to think through and navigate in the moment. And I have to be willing to get it wrong. As you said, DAOUD, that it would be easier to just not do it. But the risk of, to me, the risk of getting it wrong is a risk worth taking. The risk of just not doing it all, I don't want to take that risk. I'm not interested in that. I want to risk getting it wrong and then being open to ask. So I remember even earlier in my time as executive director, I had to order some pizzas for a group, interfaith group that we had gathered, and I knew there were going to be Muslims present, and so I ordered one pizza with pepperoni and the rest were vegetarian. And then ultimately, DAOUD and I had a conversation about it, and I said, hey, did I get that wrong? My intent was to be hospitable, to ensure that there was at minimum enough pizza for the Muslims in the room and for any other vegetarians. But tell me, how do you think about that? And we had a great conversation about it to say, well, on the one hand, right, there's nothing wrong with having this present. People can choose to eat what they want to or not. And at the same time, for many Muslims, they are used to being in spaces where they already come in as a minority in the room, and they're always having to navigate, what can I eat or what can I not eat? So can we create a space where that barrier is eliminated and they can feel more free to just be fully themselves in that? Yes, absolutely. Next time I won't order that one pepperoni pizza. And so I got it wrong. And yet it opened up this great opportunity for learning and for us to have a real conversation and to build deeper trust and respect with each other. So again, one of my values, be willing to get it wrong and to ask, how did I do and how can I do that better? Okay, so I've named some of my sort of points of discernment. Are there others that you all would like to add to that list that are utilized before we turn it over to others to join in?
Mallory, I feel like you covered some really great pieces, and I think that being willing to get it wrong and then being willing to have those conversations strikes me as super critical. And then I really appreciate and resonate with the thinking about the power dynamics of a situation and how your action is going to impact other people's, especially thinking as a white Christian. And I think that my actions in a particular situation should look different than perhaps a Black Christian's actions or than a Muslim's actions in a certain situation, depending on the dynamics and sort of the makeup of the space. And then on top of the curiosity piece that I think folks have brought up, I wanted to add, I just finished reading Valerie Kaur's new book called See No Stranger, which is really good. I recommend it to everyone. But one of the things she talks about, instead of curiosity, she talks about wonder. And I really appreciated the way she talks about that, because she's talking about it in a, multi-faith, multi-racial sort of context, and that the interpersonal value of wondering, like truly taking the time to wonder about somebody else. And that struck me in this conversation as really important for wondering about like the why behind certain tensions that come up, or certain things that are seen as deeply held values or differences, and doing that kind of work of wondering, and perhaps asking, if you have that relationship, the whys behind it, I feel like can also help guide your action, instead of it just being like a reaction to something, but rather actually like intentionally thinking through that.
DAOUD and Khadija, anything you all would add to that list, kind of your values and points of discernment?
Yes, Khadija?
Oh, you go.
Okay. In my personal communication with my Creator, in my faith tradition, I call upon the most graceful, most compassionate. And I'm never in competition with God to be the most. But I have a duty, I have a religious duty to come with grace in any interaction that I have with another individual. That for a lot of reasons that I think many of us can easily identify, this person deserves grace from me. And I receive that grace from God. If I'm able to offend God repeatedly in a single day and continue to have a relationship with that God who is so important to me, I cannot imagine that I can turn away from a neighbor, a friend, a guest, because of something that happened that I perceived to be offensive. And so to get out of your lane, to really expand the circle, to move away from saying, the safest thing is to say, Mallory, you can go to your own swimming pool or to your community pool, or you go swim at the lake, whatever, but you're not going to come to my house. We're not going to share a meal, and because I'm afraid you're going to offend me. I'm going to take the risk, and I'm okay with being offended for the opportunity that you and I come together to do something great. For you and I to show that, yes, we can be, as humans, kind and wonderful, and you and I can make God proud of both of us. Even if you ate pork, which is okay for you, and even if I had lamb bacon, which is okay for me. That grace, I think, is a requirement. And you mentioned the way that we work on creating community. I think humility, respect, understanding, empathy, and compassion. I wonder if even without, those aren't necessarily a spectrum from 0 to 10, but I think we should always start with compassion, caring about other people. Maybe it would push us to not get offended as quickly, not to focus on ourselves, but really focus on the other person. And as you mentioned, I loved what you said. How can I be hospitable? How can I show you my value? And how can I give you a chance to allow me to see your value and honor you as a human being? And so I would name coming to the table with grace and with compassion in the first place, even before we get to know one another.
Great, thank you. Khadija, anything you want to add quickly before we open it up?
I feel like DAOUD and Catherine pretty much covered it. I think maybe one thing I would add is patience. Because I think a part of humility is to sort of reach that point of humility within your own self. It requires a lot of patience with your own surroundings and with yourself, and honesty as well. And so I think those are things that people should be using as those kinds of points of discernment alongside the ones that were just discussed. So yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you to our panelists. This has been so rich. Okay, I'm going to open it up to the rest of you. So for those of you who are joining the conversation, if you would like, please feel free at this point to turn on your video and or to unmute your microphone if you'd like to offer a question or a comment or ask for clarification around something to one of our panelists or for the group here, and that's how we'll finish out our time together tonight. So any of you who have questions or thoughts, please feel free to share them now. I know it's tricky with a lot of people in a Zoom call and no one wants to step over each other. So maybe let me just ask those who've been viewing a question. Has there been a particular moment in tonight's conversation that has been especially striking for you or noteworthy for you, and something that you will be continue to be chewing on or processing after this conversation?
I'm happy to speak a little bit. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for offering this. This is one of the first events I've attended in COVID times, and it's so nice to be in community, even virtually, outside of work meetings. But I'm Lexi Salmon. I'm the assistant director at the Pluralism Project, and I'm so delighted to learn more about what you all do at the center through Khadija. I'm so proud of our researcher for her remarks today. But I was, Mallory, actually thinking a lot about what you said about those moments of discomfort for you. And I think that Khadija talked about this a little bit too, and getting more comfortable with your limits and your values. But I think that moment of discomfort, we're trained to experience that as a negative. But I think actually it's the flip side of what's so wonderful about living in this world of engaging with folks across lines of difference, which is that it helps you learn your limits, what's important to you as you push on those boundaries a little bit. And that feeling, which can feel negative, I know that I felt it. So I'm Jewish, and when I've been at Catholic Mass for a long time, I have a lot of Catholic friends. I thought, should I kneel when they kneel? And I did when I first went, and it felt really uncomfortable for me. And then I made the choice not to. And at first I felt badly about that I was uncomfortable. Was I not a good partner or ally? And I actually started to understand that in other moments of discomfort as shining a light on my own values and where the limits of my faith tradition are, whether it's about clothing or food or anything of the like. And so, Mallory, I liked hearing you talk about that, actually not in a terribly negative way, because I think we do often talk about that in a negative way, but that does seem to me to be an offshoot of that feeling I think we all have when we work in this space, where working with other communities doesn't undermine my commitment to my faith, it actually strengthens it. So I think I'll be thinking about that, how to turn that bad feeling on its head and how to talk about that explicitly. I think I'll be thinking about that after tonight.
I love that, Lexi. Thank you for sharing, and so glad you're joining us tonight. Others?
Show yourself. And show myself. Okay. Hi, I'm Becky. It's so nice to meet everybody. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Becky.
Okay, I don't know why my video, can my video come on? You cannot start your video. Okay, the host has stopped it. Start my video. I feel like I'm on one of the Saturday Night Live Zoom comedies right now. Okay, there we go. Okay, I got it.
Oh, great.
So you asked what particularly struck us, and I am going to remember this. I think it was, am I saying the name correctly? DAOUD? Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
There seem to, in a world today where it seems like everybody's getting offended about almost everything, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of redemption once you might have offended someone, or I don't know how they're doing it now. But he said, if I'm able to offend God, my most important relationship, if I can offend God over and over in a single day and continue to have that relationship with God, I can't imagine turning away from a guest or a new friend if something happened that I perceived to be offensive. Thank you. I value that, and I haven't heard it put quite like that. I'm going to remember that and share that. So thank you very much. That's my takeaway. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Becky. Others, questions, or just what struck you and what you're going to continue thinking about after tonight?
Mallory, I have a question if I could ask. This is Lynn Holder. And yeah, and you know, I really appreciate all of this, these conversations tonight, especially as Catherine was sharing, you know, about growing up in a, you know, as a Christian, strong Christian faith, and then meeting other people. You know, one of the things that I have kind of struggled with a little bit is, you know, when these holidays come along, if it's a Muslim holiday, we have friends who are Buddhist, I mean, just Hindu, all different kinds. I have a very close Ethiopian Orthodox friend, and when their holidays come along, I always want to say, you know, I hope you have a nice holiday, but then part of me says, well, if I do that, does that seem fake? You know, is it genuine? What are, you know, is anybody going to think, oh, what is she? She's not even, you know, Hindu or Muslim or whatever. Is that appropriate? And then you feel like, should you ask? Is it okay if I wish you, you know, have a happy Eid or whatever? I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just out of a genuine desire to want them to enjoy their holiday, even if I don't necessarily celebrate that holiday, whether it be Hanukkah or whatever. I can still wish for them, you know, to pass that greeting along. So I just wondered if any of you have kind of gone through that struggle, maybe a little bit, maybe even in your younger years, as you've had relationships, you know, that have grown with others. How, you know, when you say that, do you feel like, you know, you're being kind of not disloyal to your own faith, but are you being genuine? You really want to be? It's just kind of a struggle. And I just wondered do you have any tips on how to navigate that? And even in your own community, you know, even if I'm with other, you know, Christian believers, and if I say, you know, we're wishing, you know, our Muslim friends a happy Eid, and they look at, what? You're doing that? You're not Muslim, you know, why are you doing that? So it's just this constant, you know, second guessing, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Lynn. Panelists, how would you all respond?
I mean, I'll never say no to a happy Eid from anyone. And I think also I grew up mostly around Christians, and so I always like wish my Christian friends like a happy Easter or a Merry Christmas. Even though, like, you know, there are Muslims everywhere who think, oh no, we shouldn't be like, you know, saying like giving their wishing them happy holidays because it's like, you know, it's not our holiday, and so we shouldn't be doing that. But I think I don't really agree with that. And I think when you do choose to go out of your way to like learn what the proper greeting is, or just say, you know, Happy Hanukkah, or I forget exactly. Brandon, my Jewish friend, taught me the ones for Passover as well, but I forget it now. But all of those greetings, like when you learn them, I think when you go out of your way to then share that with your friend or your community member, there's like a gratitude there, and I think it's a mutual gratitude. Like, I'm grateful for your presence in our community, and I'm grateful for this identity that you bring, and I'm choosing to honor your identity, and I'm choosing to honor your tradition, and give you well wishes. And I think about this recently. At work, we usually have our meetings on Friday mornings, and Lexi's laughing because she knows where I'm going with this. But Eid was last week, and I get an email from Lexi on, I believe it was like Wednesday or Tuesday, and she was like, Khadija, this is so off brand, I'm so sorry, but I can't believe we scheduled a meeting on Friday and it's Eid, and Bilal reached out, another Muslim coworker of mine, And she was like, please let me know if like there's anything we can do to like accommodate, whether we move the meeting or cancel it, do something. And for me, I was fasting, so my brain was like elsewhere, and I was just tired, and it completely slipped my mind. And I was like, oh my gosh, my boss is awesome. She thought of this, and I totally forgot. But it shows a level of like, I think, respect, gratitude, and compassion for the person's presence in your life and in their wholeness when you do just do the smallest thing, like move a meeting or cancel a meeting, or give them well wishes on their holiday. And so I think you should continue wishing your friends happy whatever holiday it is.
That's great, thanks.
I have to say one thing someone said to me years ago, and I can't believe that this didn't come to my mind first, but was so helpful, was to think about it like wishing someone a happy birthday. You would never not wish someone a happy birthday because it's not your birthday. And obviously it's not as simple as that because of what Khadija mentioned about certain holidays the theology of them might conflict with your own faith, but I found that incredibly helpful and informative when talking to other people about why it is so easy for me to offer those well wishes, because it's, it's not a birthday, but I don't have a problem wishing someone else a happy birthday. I don't think that makes it my birthday.
That's good.
Great question, Lynn. Thank you for that. Other questions or comments?
I'll mention something to Lynn's question, and that is those well wishes, I think, create such goodwill between people who are not in the same subgroup or let's say Muslim Christian or Muslim Jewish or Baha'i. I think if we reflect upon that, that goodwill is actually most needed in diverse communities, more so than it's needed within the same community. Like I can tell Khadija Happy Eid until, the sun comes up. And if Becky reached out and said, oh, by the way, Happy Eid, I think Khadija would be like on cloud nine. She would be so appreciative that Becky was so thoughtful that she, presented with such goodwill that I think Khadija would be hard-pressed not to return the favor. And I can't see all the terrible things that could arise from two people honoring one another, knowing that both Khadija and Becky are comfortable in their own skin and with who they are. One last thought, I think it's important. We've talked about truth a lot. And I have a relative visited me in Nashville, and we go to Nolensville Road and we enter this Middle Eastern grocery store, and my brother fills up his cart, and then he picks up the Turkish sausage and what have you, and the labneh, and then he gets to that one door of the fridge that has beer, and he gets very worked up, and he starts taking every item out and putting it back on the shelf, and then he leaves the basket with a few items, and he summons me to leave with him, and we leave, and I said, did you see a rat in the freezer? Was there something, terrible? And he said, I can't believe that they sell alcohol in there. That was wrong on so many different levels, because they are Arab, but they're Christian, the owners of the store. And I buy groceries from Publix, and Publix sells alcohol. And I've never had alcohol, but I would say I've never, ever been perfect. And so it's important that we present ourselves with be sincere in who we are. We're not so perfect that wishing someone a Merry Christmas is gonna take me from being the saint to someone who is, excuse the term, going to hell as a Muslim because I wish someone a Merry Christmas. The other thing is intention. I think in my tradition, intention is actually more important than the act itself. And so it may be true that someone wishing Merry Christmas with a certain intention may not be the appropriate thing. And it may be that wishing it is the appropriate thing. It has to be in context, and it has to be, like I wouldn't eat pork, or I wouldn't, pass a bottle of wine because it's the right thing in that context, and I think Khadija was interviewing me last night for a school project for her, and she said, there's things that I hold dear, and those are things I don't negotiate on, and I'm sure there are times even with those, there are so many Muslim women who've had to remove the hijab in certain places, and while they didn't do it willingly, they did that, and it didn't reduce them, it didn't diminish them. And I know from everything that I know about my Creator, that my Creator is way, way, way bigger than those issues that around the whole holiday we engage in, almost ruin the holiday. Every holiday, it's almost like an unsettled issue. If you're not comfortable, I accept that for you. I mean, don't wish anyone. That's great. But I think we have to allow each other to be who we are, even within the same tradition. I don't do it out of ignorance. I do it with conviction when I do wish someone a happy holiday. And I know exactly why I'm doing it. And I know that when Jeff Holder reaches out and he says, have a blessed Eid, I'm reduced to tears because of that act of kindness. So I think it's very important to be who you are, to be that individual, even within that faith tradition. Ultimately, it's about how you live your faith tradition out and how truthful you are to what you believe to be your truth, and not live out everyone else's Islam or Christianity or Baha'ism or whatever it is.
Thanks, DAOUD. Mike, I think you have your proverbial hand raised there on the screen to ask a question. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
Thank you. There's I'm a Christian, by the way. So there's a man that I got to know a bit. He's from Palestine originally, and he is Muslim-ish. He's not exactly practicing, and that was one of the things that we talked about. We talked about a lot of things having to do with politics and religion at great length, but I think the most meaningful part of what we talked about was him and grappling with his religious identity. He actually told me, like, because of certain things that he doesn't practice anymore, and hasn't practiced in a while, he questions whether he is still even Muslim. And so we talked about that in some depth. And short version, I basically said, I think you're still Muslim because I can't come up with anything else that you are. And I don't think you've apostatized, but you may not be all that close to the deen. And the best response I was able to come up with at the time was that he has responsibilities from Islam. He may not necessarily fulfill all those responsibilities at any given time, but until he decides that he will no longer be responsible for those things, he still has the responsibilities, and in my mind is still a Muslim. However, with all that being said, it has occurred to me that I haven't really checked in with anyone about what that really looks like from a practicing Muslim perspective. And I don't really know if that's the best way to talk about it or not. So I wanted to check in on that. I made an attempt, but I did so without really knowing what I was doing.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to open it up to Khadija and DAOUD to offer any thoughts. Catherine, you're certainly welcome to speak as well. And then after that, I'll wrap up our time together.
I really love this question because in my conversation with Ammu DAOUD, and I call him Ammu DAOUD because he's like my uncle. I've known him for 10 years. So we were having a conversation and I was talking to him about how when I moved to Boston, I was exposed to like this whole different community of Muslims, and Muslims like all across the practicing and observant spectrum. And for me, various, I guess, experiences like in my teenhood and in college have led me to a certain kind of practice where I don't like to judge people. And I feel like facing people with judgment as the primary sort of, if we're thinking of points of discernment, is never helpful for you as an individual and for the person on the receiving end of your judgment. And especially with Islam and how involved sort of our religious practice is and how much, you know, rules and like legislation there is within the religion, it's very easy for people to fall victim to the what we call the haram police, which haram just means like something is forbidden. And so there's plenty of people at like your local mosque who are just going to tell every other person, no, you're doing this haram, and oh, your ankle is showing it, it's haram. And for me, when you're engaging people in that way, no matter where they fall, sort of whether they're really practicing, whether they're observing or not, when you engage them in a way about where you're sort of scrutinizing every single thing they're doing, you're not facing the person as a spiritual being. You're primarily, right? You're not facing them as a creature of God, of like of a holy being, but you're facing them as like an automaton who's either with the program or not. And so it makes me sad to hear your friend sort of grappling with this issue of, am I a Muslim? Am I not? I'm not praying, or I'm not fasting, or I'm doing this thing. And does that bring me outside of the fold of Islam? Am I still within the fold of Islam? Where am I on this? People will say this and people will say that. And I think this goes back to intentions. Part of it goes back to intentions. And I think part of it also goes back to someone's, I think the fundamental part of people's spiritual life, which is how they first and foremost view their relationship with God. So I was actually having a conversation with my mom, and she actually brought this up to me. She teaches at she's the principal of our local Sunday school, and she was asking us about my friend and I, who's visiting with us. She was asking us, like, what do you guys think of how the Quran is taught? And DAOUD knows that all of the chapters at the end of the Quran are the shortest and the easiest to memorize. And because they're the easiest to memorize, those are the first ones that we teach kids. But the themes within all of those chapters are very like day of judgment, resurrection, punishment, blah, blah, blah. Very like harsh themes for children, I think. And so my mom was asking, like, why do you think people like fall out of practice within Islam? Like, what about their upbringing? What about their personhood brings them to that point where they no longer feel connected to the deen, or they fall short? And so we talked about it, and my mom said, you know, I think it's the way people teach the Quran. And rather than beginning with, you know, chapters and sort of excerpts from certain chapters of the Quran that focus on God's mercy and his love and his compassion, and sort of entering and planting those seeds of spirituality, children end up feeling or end up getting like a version of their religion that's like rooted in fear of punishment from your creator and like hellfire and all of these things. And so the spirit isn't adequately nurtured, in my opinion. And I think that so while it makes me sad, Mike, to hear your friend sort of worrying about himself, I think the fact that he's worried about whether he considers himself a Muslim or not points to a consciousness about his own spirit and his own spirituality. And I think that so long as that is there, and a belief in like that greater power of God, I think that those come before practice in someone's spirituality. And I think that applies to multiple religions and faith identities. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Khadija. Friends, I feel like we could go on for hours, and I have a sense that many of you might actually stay on for that because this conversation has been so rich. So to honor your time, let me offer one closing thought. As I have been part of this conversation, I have been thinking about one of my most cherished aspects of my faith tradition and the text, the sacred texts that have formed me, and that is this story that says that despite all of the risks and all of the complexities, that God still chose to create humanity, to engage with humanity, to be in relationship with humanity, and to see us through. That tells me that if I am made in the image of that God, then I'm also being invited to navigate in real relationships with other human beings in the midst of all of these complexities and all of these risks, because the risks are worth taking for the sake of being in real, beautiful, deep alive engagement and relationship with other human beings who are different from me and also really similar. And so thank you to our panelists who have helped illuminate for us ways that we can do that, who have helped to enliven our courage to do that, to try it. I hope that you all will continue to do so. Those of you who have joined us tonight, thank you for each of you for your time, for what you've offered. I hope that you'll continue to join us for the rest of this series. We have, this is the first of 6 installments for our fall Table Talk series. You've registered for this one, which means you now have the registration for all of them. So we invite you to join us for the rest of this series. My sense is that what you've experienced tonight will be exactly what holds true for all of the rest. They will be rich and worthwhile conversations. So on behalf of Faith and Culture Center, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our guests. Thanks for everyone joining, and peace to each of you. Good night, friends.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mallory.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.